Hello everyone, and today I'm going to go through how I revised for my Further Maths GCSE, and perhaps this can give you some ideas to revise and get the best grade in your own Further Maths GCSE. This is a plan on a page. On the left hand side, I've listed the topics as per the specification, and then the columns to the right list the resources that I had. The first column to the right, the self-score column, should be the first column to be filled in, and in that column you'd write in what grade you think you'd get if you did a test on that topic. The other columns can be filled in with the date or simply a tick once you've completed that topic using that specific resource. This does include writing up your own notes / doing your own practice questions. This is what my folder and additional Further Maths resources look like at the end of my Further Maths GCSE. In the folder I have about 700 pages of working. Behind you can see my two school notebooks, and on their left is an additional textbook which I got. I was also given a Further Maths textbook by school, which I'll show you later. To briefly list the resources I had available, I had my own school notebooks, the specification, the textbook that was given to me by school, my own notes and my own workings, and the Edexcel C1 book. The Edexcel book is an AS/A level book, however it is applicable to Further Maths as long as you ignore the irrelevant sections. Moving on to more detail on the resources. The first and most important resource, arguably, is the specification from your exam board website. You can download and print off the specification, and I believe it's the most important as it lists all of the topics which you have to know for when you sit your exam. Secondly, you have your own school notes, working out questions which you may do in school. This is also important because if there's anything that you get wrong in school, then you can take your book home and go over it in more detail over a longer period of time at home to ensure that you have the understanding. And thirdly, you have your own notes, which includes your own practice questions or your own practice tests which you've done at home. As you can see, I've filed all of mine in a folder, and as I previously said, it comes up to about 500 to 700 pages of working altogether. Now moving on to the textbooks. On the left hand side you can see the textbook that I used for my Further Maths exam, and that was an AQA certificate in Further Maths at level 2. Keep in mind that there are other Further Maths curriculums for which this video is applicable to, however I will be focusing on the level 2 AQA Further Maths. And on the right hand side you can see the C1 textbook, which is for the old A-level specifications. You can get it for quite cheap, and the practice questions it has, along with the explanations with them, are very helpful. When it comes to your final exams, you'll sit two different papers. One of them is non-calculator, and in the other you will have access to your calculator. For the second paper, the calculator paper, I believe that you must be able to utilize most of the functionality of your calculator, especially if in advance you bought an A-level calculator, which has much more functionality than the old calculator that you may have been used to. This is a screenshot from the AQA specification of describing the two exams that you'll sit. It may be different for other specifications, so you'll have to go through and check what the exam will cover and how it will be split. So for the GCSE that I sat, there were two papers, paper 1 being non-calculator. For that you'd have an hour and 45 minutes to complete the 80-mark paper, and that would be worth half of the GCSE. And the other half will be gone from paper 2, which is also an hour and 45 minutes, worth 80 marks, which is the calculator paper. Both exams have similar question styles, which involve short single-mark questions and multi-step problems. As with most papers, the further you go through the paper, the more difficult the questions would become. It's all well and good to know what kinds of questions would come up in the exam, but how are you supposed to answer them? Well, for the short answer questions, these are typically multiple choice or just simple calculations. So for these, for the multiple choice questions especially, you can eliminate the incorrect answers immediately. When it comes to simple calculations or just short answers in general, for example graph transformations, it only requires a single number or a symbol and a letter. When it comes to the multi-step questions, there are a few points to keep in mind. Firstly, even if your answer is incorrect, then in further steps in the question where you have to use your incorrect answer, then you can still get marks for carrying forward an error. An additional thing that you want to do is to always check your final answer. So once you completed a calculation and gotten a value for x, for example, then you can put it back into your original equation and see if you get the expected result. And if you don't get what you expect to, then double check your working and make sure you haven't made any small mistakes with the symbols. And a final tip when it comes to the questions later on in the exam is to leave the harder questions until the end of the test. Solve as many of the simpler questions in the time that you have before you get onto the hard ones. This way you don't waste your time on a question that you aren't able to do and can maximize the amount of marks that you can get by completing the other questions. One very important thing that you should always do in every question is to show every step of your working. Even if you can't get to the final answer or don't even know what you're doing, then you can still get marks for having some steps down of a method. However, if you just write down an answer and it was incorrect, then you won't be able to get any marks because the examiner doesn't know what you've done to get the answer. Final things to remember. Firstly, you should always check over your working. And secondly, if you're able to, then try and estimate what the answer would be. For example, if the question asks you to calculate how much water flows from a tap in a kitchen, well, it's obviously not going to be 2 milliliters a second, but it also isn't going to be 2,000 liters per second. So if your answer is vastly outside of what you think, then just double check your working and make sure that you haven't made any mistakes. And one final point, make sure that you're answering the correct question. So make sure that if the question is asking you to solve, then you solve it, or if it's asking you to do a proof, then show every step and explain how you've proven it. Questions which say hence or otherwise solved, then make sure that you're using the answer from the previous question in order to help you in this question. One additional thing when it comes to worded problems is to read through the context once or twice, get a basic understanding of what's happening, and then take all of the numbers and relevant information out and remove them, filter them out from the text and write them down so you don't have to read through the text and end up getting confused. Here is a revision table which I wrote up for my Further Maths exam. As you can see, it lists my resources on the left hand side and has empty columns on the right hand side. In those columns on the right, you can write in the dates in which you complete that resource. So as you can see, for example, on the 5th of June, I went through my own notes and workings for the third time, while on the 7th of June, 2 days later, I went through the Further Maths specification. This way you can see which resource you saturated your knowledge from and which resource you might be able to gain new points from. When it comes to exam preparation, the most important thing that you can do when it comes to revising maths is practice questions. Now, the real question is, where can you get them? So here's the answer. There are numerous websites from which you can get practice questions from, and one of the best ones for Further Maths is Dr. Frost Maths. What Dr. Frost has done, he's a teacher in England who teaches maths. And on his website he's got multiple topics listed along with sets of practice questions, solutions to them, and videos in order to help your understanding of the topic. Additional places you can get your practice questions from include AS past papers. Now, even though it's an A-level, it doesn't mean that you can't try some of the questions. For example, the calculus questions involving differentiation or other questions involving vectors. Some of the A-level Maths Genie papers are applicable, along with Madas Maths, who is another maths teacher, and he also has A-level resources applicable to Further Maths. To summarize, these are the two key points that you should take away from this presentation. Firstly, practice, practice, practice. Do as many practice questions as you can because they can only serve to help you. And secondly, as my teacher said, there's no point in doing practice questions at all if you don't check it with a mark scheme. If you get the answer correct, then congratulations, you can solve that kind of question. But if there's a particular style which you're finding difficult, or certain errors which you consistently make, then by checking against the mark scheme, you can identify those errors and you can iron them out and become the best student that you can be. If you keep these two things in mind, there is no doubt that you will achieve a grade 9 or A star. As my teacher, one of my teachers says, don't practice until you get it right, keep practicing until you can't get it wrong. So even if you get 1 right out of 100, keep going until you can get 100 out of 100. Thank you for listening, and good luck in your Further Maths GCSE.